you shouldn't build your house underneath the rock pile?
Not one that has rocks like this. I mean,
okay, so we're going to go to plague 2. This is environmental exterior problems.
okay, so we're going to be talking about exterior environmental problems. You're going to buy a house, you want to avoid exterior environmental problems. You don't want to buy a house that's got, issues nearby.
Sometimes issues nearby could be issues in the forest or an old area. For example, here's where you don't even know what was out here. These empty barrels are out in the forest. And then there could be other ones too, like if, let's say you had an apple orchard and the apple orchard's gone, but what about the pesticides in the ground? And so you always want to look at where you're buying a home, building a home, and look at all potentials.
I know that most contracts state that, we're not responsible for environmental stuff, but I'll walk in the background. If I see a lot of barrels like this, I'll tell the people, you better find out what's back here, because you don't know what's back here. And the people appreciate it.
Then we're going to call this abandoned. I'll call this the Abandoned Manhattan Project site. And it doesn't have to be a Manhattan project. It could be any site, but there's a lot of abandoned buildings all over the country. And this particular site was interesting because I inspected a house up at the top of the hill, and you can see in the photo there, about 20 some years ago, and they said, yeah, I asked them, why'd you buy the house? Oh, they died of cancer. And they go, that's kind of funny because half the people on the street died of cancer. And this is going back 20 some years. Well, I found out later, and I'm an urban explorer, I found out that there's a site right down the hill that used to refine uranium-235 for the Manhattan Project during, World War II. And so that was radioactive. I did visit the site. These are my photos, and that radioactive sign that you see is not even anywhere near the outside gates. This is way in the back, and you have to trespass to get to these signs. And so living in areas with high contamination such as radiation or even a lead smelter could be kind of have almost the same type of problem.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about living near nuclear. So, so you're doing a home inspection, and so what do you say to the people when there's, you could see in full view, 2 cooling towers from a nuclear plant? What do you say to your people about the site?
Basically,
I don't
say a word.
You don't say anything. If they can't see a nuclear plant in their backyard, it's not my responsibility, okay? Yeah. But
well, you can see how this ended up pretty good for the people in Japan, didn't it? Now the whole place is evacuated, almost 80, 90 miles? And so here's your Fukushima plant, and these reactors, I think there's 3 or 4 of them that exploded. Now they're contaminating the air. And by the way, these are GE Mark I reactors, which we also have these in the U.S. I think that we have 23 nuclear sites in many of our states with the same reactors that exploded in Japan at Fukushima. And then these are maps. You can look this up. Now they're saying that we're getting poisoned by the water, and the fish are all radioactive, and so radioactive nuclear power plants probably is not a great idea. Me and Jim were just trying to figure out how many we actually had after this accident in the U.S., and we came to the conclusion that how many states can we actually live in now that don't have them, that we'll be safe in?
Well, you're probably taking around 5.
5 states.
I go, we got Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, North and South Dakota. So.
And that's it. And everywhere else, forget about it, right? Anyways, so we're going to get into now pollution and water and air, soil and noise.
And these all, any of these could affect the habitability of the house or the resale value of the house. I know we're not appraisers, but again, it's up to us, I feel, as a home inspector, to give as much information as you can to your homeowner and the home buyer. And home buyers appreciate thoughts because the average home buyer doesn't really think too much when they're buying about the house. So, our next slide.
Well, on Sunday, they go with the realtor on Sunday afternoon because that's the day the Sunday's showing houses, and it's a nice sunny day, and they buy a house. They never get on the internet, and they never check anything. And you got more localized air pollution, like neighborhood odors, like KFC. I mean, you smell chicken or you smell burgers all day long. How about a steel mill? Steel mills still, they do smell pretty bad. And then the sewer treatment plant are bad, but maybe when you bought the house, it wasn't a windy day. I remember doing that dog food processing plant. You almost puke just in the backyard from that's one of the worst types of odors to have.
Okay, so again, what do you say to your client? If you smell Kentucky Fried Chicken in the backyard, what do you say anything to him? What do you say to him, Marco?
I say, I'm getting hungry.
That's about okay.
Hungry. Anyways, no.
Okay, so moving on.
All right, so
if you see a sign for a hog facility next door, I mean, hopefully the people have done their due diligence.
Well, the hog facilities actually have other problems too. They also have those pools, those urine pools, and you've got land contamination. And so, any types of food processing plant, any type of dairy plant, things like that, are all going to cause odors.
Okay, so we have again localized water pollution problem. Here's a house that was built at the bottom of an old landfill. If you look up there, you can see how you have the steep hill here. Well, what's going to happen with this house? You're going to have water leaching out of this landfill, and it's going to go into this person's backyard. It's going to seep up, and who knows what's going to happen. Again, I tell my people, I said, did you know that this was an old dump? And I tell them that, and then if the realtor doesn't like it, that's too darn bad. But I think my people have to know that they're living at the bottom of an old.
And so the contamination, the water contamination, the runoff is all going to be poisonous. And is it called a garbage dump or landfill? Or is it the same thing?
Well, it used to be called garbage dump. Now they don't call it that. It's a euphemism.
It's a nice word.
It's politically correct. You can't call something a garbage dump anymore. Okay, so we have a next case study would be about groundwater contamination. Okay, and how groundwater contamination can cause you interior odors. Okay, here we have a little slide just showing you how internal waterproofing systems work. Here we have it on the right. You got a sump pump, and then you got drain tile. The water drains into the drain tile, then it gets pumped out to the yard.
And what's important in this particular case is when they do install interior waterproofing systems, they have to bust the foundation so the outside water or contamination goes to the inside gutter system, which then goes to a sub pump. So what was on the outside, we also dug up, and they had a septic system. So we flushed the toilet and ran a dishwasher, and the thermal image actually shows you the hot water is actually flowing to the front yard to the septic tank.
We also put a dye in it, too. We put a little green dye in it.
Yeah, we dyed it, and so we ran dye to the front, and we looked at the front yard, and we didn't see any dye coming out of the ground or anything like that. And so later, about, 20 minutes later, the dye started coming out of the waterproofing system. And so what was happening was there was a breach underground from the septic system or to the septic system where the sludge and sludge water, black water, would leak, and it would fill up the ground and somehow travel back to the house and somehow leak into the holes caused by the interior waterproofing system, and then travel into the basement drain tile system, the perforated black pipe, and then end up in the sub pump. And you can see how the dye just came right back in. And that is also the sludge water that was being flushed down the toilet, because that's where we put the dye in the toilet when we flushed it down. So they were getting sewer gas odor from basically toilet water.
Well, this is kind of, I know they're having problems with water in California, but this is kind of like water recycling. You flushed your toilet, it went to the septic tank, and it came back to your house. No?
But it was never filtered. There's a difference.
Oh, they didn't. Well, they got to work on that.
And so when they bought the house, what was really odd was the homeowners had a lot of things going on. They had air fresheners plugged in everywhere. Windows were open. They had this weird-looking fan that they plugged into the basement. So when the house stunk, they would turn on this fan with the improper electrical splice and suck the air out of the house. And our clients, they didn't hire a home inspector, and nobody even caught this anomaly.
So Marco and I have on our reports, we have something called APOD, and that means Ask Present Owner Details. If you see something like this in a house, don't speculate in terms of what it's for. I mean, you could tell the people what you think it's about or what it could be, but you got to ask the owner, why do you have this in the house?
Okay? A homemade garbage can fan.
Yeah, and why did they have it in the house?
To get rid of the sewer odors. And then the sub pump actually dumped it out into the neighbor's stream. And you could see up in the top picture where the water's starting to get diluted, but you can still see the green dye coming right out to the stream out front. And now the neighbors get to smell it, and the whole backyard stinks. This house had other problems too. It also had a musty mold odor, and what I like to do is I look at the window, especially on the north side. A lot of times if there's a condensation problem, it's because the humidity is too high in the home, and you'll get mold and mildew stains on the windows. And they had this was a split type of home where the basement had the waterproofing system we talked about, and the sub pump, and the first floor was a slab. Always look in the ducts, and you can see these ducts had dropped down, and the humidity in the house was actually condensating underneath the slab. So now they're also causing mold and mildew and humidity problems. And so this house had a lot of problems, and their home inspector should have caught this.
We have another item: noise pollution. You know, us as home inspectors, is it our duty to tell people about noise pollution? But sometimes it comes up. For instance, I did a job one time where the guy was buying a house near the airport, and the master bedroom had curtains on the ceiling, on the walls, heavy felt curtains. And he goes, "Well, why do you think those are on the wall?"
For the noise.
For the noise of planes, and then you could hear the plane come over. He couldn't sleep. So, I mean, sometimes you got to kind of, feed the people the information. They might not know.
Well, I inspected a house, and not only is it just sometimes noise pollution, this particular place had railroad tracks, and the basement foundation mortar joints were failing, and it was getting all kind of settlement issues, and it was telegraphing to the upper structure. So it could have more than just noise. It could have, in this case, vibration problems.
Okay, so we're talking about exterior backyard pollution. So you got situations with old jungle gyms that before they came up with new methods of treating wood, they used arsenic in and even lead in the wood, the treated wood. But even more so, you have this was like, actually, I think this was Walt Disney, India style.
Disneyland in India.
India. Well, they did say Walt Disney went to India to get inspiration in terms of making Disneyland.
So this was like his first shot at it.
It was his first shot, yeah. But you could be guaranteed that there's probably lead paint on these cars.
Well, lead paint's more of a problem in older neighborhoods because these older homes, the exterior siding windows will start to peel, and you got friction of the windows, and you got paint chips. And back before the lead laws, people would scrape the paint, and so the soil around the house is contaminated with lead. And then the little boys play with their little Tonka trucks, and the girls play with their dolls, and they're getting poisoned. So lead is still a problem today, especially around older homes and the soil around homes and garages. So
we routinely run into houses that they've rehabbed, and the people have not put down drop cloths on these old garages built prior to 1967, and total contamination around the house and the garage.
And then the dog goes and buries his bone, right? And then he comes in the house and he cleans off his paws on your carpet, and so now you got dog take home.
No, the dog goes and rolls in the lead.
Yeah, and then he sits on a couch and he sleeps with you in
and the
bed.
Kids pet him and they get poisoned. We've had a couple instances in Cleveland where that's occurred.
All right, now we're going to go to Plague 3, bad soils and geological conditions.
We call them bad soils. You build a house and they got bad soils. It's not the house is going to have problems, and also you got geological conditions. And again, we as home inspectors, it's not our duty to tell people about bad soils and geological conditions. But, if you know something about them, anything you could tell your client that will help them, they'll appreciate it, okay? And I always try to go beyond the ASHI standards. Anyways, knowing about the soil is very important, and we're just going to quickly, just for your edification, give you a little bit of history about soils.
Yeah, so we'll start off with a couple types of soils. Now, if you move in near a sandy soil area, well, sandy soil could be a problem because it's very difficult to get the proper moisture content. So when you have a hole, you fill it with sand, and it's hard to compact the sand unless you have exactly exactly the proper moisture. So too much water will cause the sand to be unstable, and too little water will cause it to settle. So sandy soils can have their own set of problems. Then we have very loam soil or silt soil. This means it has a lot of small fines, and it could be it's not stable. And for example, marl and peat will fit into this category. They're very light, like 60 to 80 pounds per cubic foot, compared to, let's say, a soil with a good mixture with clay could be 120 to 130 pounds per cubic foot. And it's very hard to compact this soil, and it's not very strong. And you'll find this soil around surrounding rivers and streams. Another type of soil is called clay, and clay does not have the best drainage. It's not impervious. Water kind of runs off it, and it can settle, it can shrink, it can crack. If, let's say, the clay is wet and you use it as backfill and then it shrinks, you got all these cracks around your house, so then the water runs into the cracks. Or let's say it's not proper, it doesn't have the optimal moisture content, and it expands. We have expansive clay, so a lot of clay can also be a problem. So basically, in a nutshell, you kind of want a mixture of clay, sand, silt. You want to have fine aggregate, coarse aggregate. You want to have some sand in there, and then this way you could manipulate the water and find the exact proper optimum moisture for the maximum dry density, for the maximum compaction. And so a good well-mixed soil, monolithic soil, which is properly compacted, and compaction could be done many different ways with those rollers and jumping jacks, and depending on the soil, you want a good mixed soil, you want it properly compacted, and you want the proper moisture content. Now, we do have other types of soil. We're going to get into this one. This is we call it garbage dump, or a newest soil problem. And people are now building on garbage dumps.
You're saying garbage dump is not good to have soil.
Wait, I thought it was a landfill soil. Did you say that landfill is the proper?
Yeah, that's PC. You can't call it garbage dump soil. It's landfill soil now.
So we're like stereotyping or something, right?
Something like that.
Okay,
but you don't want banana peels in your soil.
Okay, landfill soil. So landfill soil. Here's a great site up in Cleveland, in Garfield Heights, where they decided to build a whole box strip center. And for a while, it was all packed in full of tenants, and then they all started to move out, starting with Wal-Mart. And not only were they moving out, but the ground was settling. And what they were doing is, as the ground settled, they would just take the asphalt and add asphalt to it. And these are photos. I started taking photos of this place since they built it. And you can see in 2007, they've already been repairing it. And then the same location, roughly 4 years later, all that new asphalt has now settled another 2 feet, so they'll have to keep adding it. Here you can see you've got tripping hazards. This is a 2008. Here's 2009. So all the electrical conduits are starting to pull apart, and you can actually see the wires going underground. So now water's getting inside these. And then here you can see, like the pipes, the PVC conduits are breaking. So they says, well, let's put flexible ones in, and we'll leave an extra foot there just in case it settles another foot. And then the road starts breaking apart, and you can see that you can't even use the loading docks anymore. And not only that, but landfills have methane. So now the methane is coming out, and people are smelling it, and it's going into the stores. And so they're getting settlement and methane problems. And now the stairs, the exterior fire escapes are all falling apart. And you can see how these don't even meet code anymore. The electrical hazards, you could see in 2008, this conduit, and now you can look at it again after one more repair, and it dropped another 2 or 3 feet. Okay, and here's another one. See, now you've got electrical wiring being pulled apart. And even the methane pumps are falling apart. And you can see the one methane pump on the right side is now leaning, and the methane pipes are breaking. And then all the sewer pipes are breaking apart because the ground is settling and failing, because the ground underneath it is landfill, and the landfill is decomposing and converting to methane. And so now none of the drains and site drains work. And so basically this was the original store, and Wal-Mart was the first one to move out because of excessive methane and outgassing and sulfur and sewer odors and tripping hazards.
So you say that this kind of smelled a little bit?
Yeah.
And
So
a new store was going to open up there, right?
a new store. Yeah. Actually, they just moved in.
And it smells like methane.
Yeah. So here's our new store that moved in. Anyways, I just recently went to the site again in 2015, and another thing I noticed is that the garbage dump is oozing, like ooze coming from the hill, and now cars are driving over this, and some people are walking through this and putting it in their carpets, and you could see the red in color. Now that could be iron, but who knows what else is there. And those set of stairs you saw in the back, they just said, let's just build a mountain of asphalt. And now I guess they're just dumping asphalt trucks, underneath the stairs. This is the last store that's left. I believe it's Office Max. I think it's still there.
So what you're basically saying, building on top of a garbage dump isn't a good idea?
No, definitely not a good idea.
Oh. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
And I remember back in 2005 and 6 when they were getting the garbage dump ready, they had construction equipment out there, and I went there and I asked him if I could go to the site and take photos, and he says, what are you taking photos of? And I said, I'm taking photos of the machinery because I teach classes on heavy machinery. And he says, sure, put on this hard hat. And when I came back into his trailer, I said, what are you going to do when all these parking lots start to settle? And the guy looked at me and says, we know they're going to settle. We're going to make so much money here that we're just going to keep putting down asphalt. Now, there's one part true. They're not making so much money because everybody moved out, but he was right about putting down asphalt because they're still putting asphalt down.
And what we find commonly in some areas on cul-de-sacs, when they build the cul-de-sacs near the edge of a hill, that builder's always looking for that extra lot. And so what are they going to do on a cul-de-sac? They're going to fill that end of the cul-de-sac with debris so they can have that extra lot. But we know that's going to cause you some problems.
Especially if the debris isn't compacted, and if the debris and soil isn't controlled, and if it doesn't have the optimum moisture content.
Now, how many builders do you really know that know what even compaction is?
They know what it is, but they don't really use it. They just kind of dump it in and they drive the truck over it, and they call that compaction.
So this is, here's the realtor. She's just staring at the house, and we're saying, oh, yes, the house is sliding down the hill. And, she can't believe it.
And she basically called us out because she had a big crack on one side of the house and a big crack on the other. And she says, Marco and Jim, I think my house is cracking in half. And most of the time, vertical cracks are not a problem. Vertical cracks are shrinkage cracks, and we tell clients, don't worry about them, unless, of course, they leak. Then you have to, waterproof them or epoxy inject them. But this was not one of those vertical, don't worry about cracks. The house was cracking in half because the soil was unstable, it was fill, and it wasn't compacted. And now this is a horizontal crack. That's a whole different ballgame than vertical cracks. Okay, horizontal cracks generally are a real problem because they're caused by soil pressure, and that could be caused by a tree being too close. It could be due to an old drain tile system that's been silted, plugged up, slow, sluggish, broken, and so the ground gets heavier and heavier because it's not draining. Okay, and then it starts to crack the wall, and it starts pushing the wall. And this is a horizontal crack caused by hydrostatic loading. Sometimes it happens at the top, sometimes at the bottom. In this case, on the bottom, engineers like to call this shear. It's kind of the same thing. It just happened to fail at the bottom. And so, these are issues because now the wall is unstable and it leaks. A lot of times you can't see this when you're looking at the house, and the basement has nice drywall finish. But when you get down on your knees and you look at the wall with your camera and you could eyeball it, you can see how this whole ground, the grading is poor, and probably the foundation was probably undersized, underdesigned. It was probably like an 8-inch wall, and the ground pushed it and cracked it. And then, homeowners, like to put walls up in basements and insulate the walls so you don't even see this. But this can leak, and it will continue to fail.
Okay, and that last one, what I always like to do, if I can, take a string, do it from the corners. It's very effective, and make sure clients see the bowing of the walls.
You're right. If you take one string from one end and tape it with duct tape, and take the string all the other and tape it, you'll see that there's like a 2 to 3 inch gap. And you could do this in the basement too. using string will tell you if the wall's not finished, of course, in the basement.
Okay, and then here we go. This retaining wall. What do you tell somebody about a retaining wall like this on their property? Like, get a second opinion, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of repairs now that we see, and there's an interior waterproofing system here. You could see it, and they had a horizontal type crack and stress cracks caused by hydrostatic loading conditions, and this is where they're starting to use different types of newer types of repairs. Basically, they glue this fabric onto the wall, and what it does, it distributes the load, and so the wall's really not supposed to crack anymore. So they're kind of like taping it. It's kind of like a duct tape repair, and it does work, but unfortunately it does nothing for shear, which is a horizontal crack below this, or tipping, which could be the whole wall itself is tipping over. And this type of repair will do nothing for those two types of problems. And 20 to 30% of the time, those two types of problems exist, and this kind of repair doesn't always work. Then you have this kind of repair. These are little plates they put in, and they'll either torque them from the inside, or there's ones that they'll torque outside. The only problem with this is it only holds part of the wall. A lot of times these wall cracks just move up above this plate or below this plate, and then you have to call the contractor to come back out and put more plates in. And we see a lot of these homes with a lot of extra plates because the crack just keeps moving. Then we got people who think that they could build their own knee walls, okay, or column pier repairs, but this is worthless because it doesn't go all the way to the ceiling. If you're going to put in a column support or a pier, it should be pinned at the top and at the bottom and fastened. So this is not going to work. This is pretty much an ugly repair, but it's the best repair. And these are I-beam columns, vertical lateral bracing supports. That a lot of these are used in Cleveland. They basically break the wall into two little walls, and you put another one in, it breaks it into four little walls. So you don't have that same soil load. It gets distributed into these lateral supports. They don't look that good, but they are very effective and they work.
Okay, so we're going to talk about landslides and soil failure, and there's many reasons why this occurs. Bad soil, you got erosion, you got loading by human or natural means, and when you just get too much loading or unstable soil, you have problems.
And here what you'll see is, this is just a photo, and you're looking at landslides and soil failure. And basically, soil will fail when it becomes wet. It'll fail when it was improperly compacted or unstable or biodegradable. And the engineers basically say, if the soil potential for sliding is the greatest at 34 to 37 degrees. It's just an engineering term and a number they came up with. Here's another view where kind of you lost the house. Okay, the house is gone and one of the bedrooms is still sitting there. And here you could see another house where the ground is just failing and breaking off. And this is how this happens. We talked a little about earlier about the types of soil. So in this picture, you'll see, let's say the blue is clay, very heavy clay, and it's impervious. It doesn't absorb water. And above the clay, let's say, is loam and permeable. In other words, it's light soil that holds a lot of water. And now let's say that it really rains. Mr. Cloud rains and rains and rains, and that whole top layer of loam or permeable soil starts to get heavier and full of water. And it gets heavier and heavier, and then the water drops, and it can't get into the impervious soil, which is the clay, which is a heavier, more dense clay. And all of a sudden, it becomes very slippery, and you can see the light blue water. It's like a layer of rainwater. Then it rains a little bit more, and the loam above the impervious soil clay gets so heavy, and then that water is like kind of like a slide, and it just slides down the hill. And that's where you get your land failure. Some people call it sloughing, land failure, slippage. Mudslides sometimes occur the same way in certain parts of geographical parts of America.
It's kind of similar to an avalanche. Basically the same thing. When you have water and slippage between the layers of sediment or ice, whatever it may be. Okay, so here we have a home. This is in the Scrin Valley, northeast Ohio, and this has the exact same problem that Marco was talking about. We have unstable soil, and the soil has been slipping away. And here's a close-up. What are these people going to do about this? It's a very, very difficult thing to stabilize something like this. And here it is. Here's the soil. There used to be a house here. There's no more houses here. Slipped away into the valley.
Now, I do a lot of homes, and sometimes, let's say you go in the backyard, and a couple things you want to look for. Where are the trees? And you look, there's some trees here, but there's no trees in your backyard, and there's a hill there going down to the river or creek. You got to wonder what happened to the trees. And then another thing you look for is sometimes you got this pretty looking fill hill where they actually fill it with more soil. And sometimes I had a house where they filled it with soil and they put up a bunch of birdhouses and put chairs up there and pretend it was a bird sanctuary. But let's think about this. Now we've got the same problem with the loam sitting on top of the clay, and now you're going to put more weight on it. What do you think is going to happen? This is just going to cause it to fail even more and continually fail. And so a lot of people try to hide things.
So you're in the backyard and you look and you see a tree that's, not quite 45, but it's getting there, and you see 2x4s all moving. Your client's going to ask you, well, what's this all about, Jim? And Marco, and what do we tell him? We tell him, like, yeah, you got some soil movement here. And we would highly, highly recommend that you talk to a soil engineer, because soil's moving here, and it's just a matter of time before it moves to your house.
And so another thing you want to look at is look at the trees and see if they're all upright or if all the trees are leaning. If they're all leaning down the hill, you got some problems. Okay? And another thing we look at is water table conditions. Sometimes if you have a high water table, that's a whole other set of problems. And you could have leaks in the basement, and you may need a dewatering system. Okay? And so here's a house that we went to. It's a nice looking house. And they had a bunch of exterior sub pumps or dewatering well systems. And what was interesting is I looked at them, they had like 5 of them. And that means basically they built this house and realized that when they put it in the basement it was flooding, like, oh my God, we're below the water table. So now you're going to build a basement in a water table, which is a problem all by itself, because now you have to manage this continuously. I probably would never build a basement into a water table. I'd always try to be above a water table so I don't have to deal with dewatering it. Well, this particular house, as I was looking at it, noticed that one of the sub pumps wasn't working. And the homeowner happened to be home, and I said, hey, one of your sub pumps isn't working. And it wasn't more than 20 minutes later, a guy shows up and puts in a new sub pump. So this guy obviously knows it's a huge problem when one of these sub pumps quits working, because then his basement leaks and he's got mold issues and other problems. Here's a builder who had the same kind of problem, and the sub pump failed and he had a finished basement. And so what do you think happens? You can see the mud marks on the wall. The basement flooded because the water table was high.
Okay, so we have talk about sinkholes. Sinkholes are sometimes they just occur. You don't know what's happening underground. But from a geological standpoint, we have something in certain areas of the country. Florida is most noted for this. It's called karst geography. And these are areas, and again, people in Florida really are aware of this, where you have the different types of soil, where you have soil over limestone, and as the water goes through the regular soil, clay goes into the limestone deteriorates, and you have voids occurring in the limestone, and then you actually have a collapse, and that's why you have the sinkholes.
And that, you said that's a lot down in the Florida regions?
Yes, because that's very typical of, there's a lot of karst geography down there.
Up here in our area, we have different types of sinkholes. These generally are caused by water line breaks underground, sewer line breaks underground. And so it takes a long time, and it just undermines, and one day you turn on a TV and you see a bus in a hole, and that's what happens. So, water running can cause these problems too. And so we are now going to start plague number 4, poorly designed homes.